The sun barely peeked through the blinds as I sat down at the breakfast table, the soft glow of morning light gently washing over the room. It was the kind of morning that felt quiet, almost serene, as though the world had slowed down for a moment just for me. My kids were still asleep, their soft breathing the only sound in the house, while I tried to enjoy the brief peace before the storm of the day began. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the rich scent filling the air. It was one of those simple pleasures that helped me gather my thoughts, to mentally prepare for the day ahead. I stirred in a bit of sugar, absent-mindedly glancing at the clock on the wall. 7:45 a.m. The kids would be up in 15 minutes, and soon the house would be buzzing with the chaos of getting ready for school, lunches to pack, and backpacks to organize. But for now it was just me and the coffee. I was grateful for these fleeting moments of calm. But then as I took the first sip, I heard him. "Hey babe." Mark's voice was casual as always. He was sitting at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone. I could feel the tension in my shoulders before the words even left his mouth. "Can I have your credit card?" he asked, not even looking up from his phone. I froze for a second, the coffee mug halfway to my lips. My stomach churned and my mind raced. I had a gut feeling I was about to walk into one of those conversations I dreaded, one that always ended with me being the bad guy, the villain in his story. "You know I don't want to give it to you," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, controlled. "You've been irresponsible with it before, and I don't want to go through that again." Mark finally looked up, his brow furrowing. "Are you serious right now? I'm just asking for it to buy a few things. I need it. Why can't you just trust me for once?" I sighed, setting my coffee down. "You don't get it, Mark. You've maxed out every credit card we have. You've been late on payments. And I'm the one who has to deal with the consequences when the bills come." He slammed his phone down on the counter, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I've been working hard, and I deserve to enjoy a few things. Don't you want me to be happy? What's the point of having money if we can't spend it?" The words stung more than they should have. "It's not about happiness, Mark. It's about responsibility. We have 2 kids to take care of. I can't just throw money away because you feel entitled to it." I could feel the tension building, thick and heavy in the air. I knew how this would go. How he would twist my words and turn it into a fight. I had learned to brace myself for the emotional manipulation, for the way he could make me feel guilty for something that wasn't even my fault. But this time I wasn't backing down. "I'm not giving it to you, Mark. Not this time," I said firmly, feeling a surge of confidence. It wasn't a dramatic statement. It wasn't an ultimatum. It was just the truth. And I had finally found the strength to say it. His face hardened, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something shift in his eyes. Anger, frustration, or maybe just disappointment. But then it came, the explosion that I had always feared, the one I knew was coming. He stood up, his chair scraping across the floor. And before I could process what was happening, he grabbed my coffee mug from the table and threw it in my face. The shock was immediate. The hot coffee hit my skin, stinging me, scalding my cheek. I gasped, stumbling back as the warm liquid dripped down my blouse, the sharp scent of burnt coffee filling the air. "How dare you?" Mark's voice was low, dangerous. "You think you're the one in control? You think you can tell me what to do? I work my ass off and I deserve better than this." I stood there, frozen, my heart racing in my chest, a mixture of shock and disbelief consuming me. The pain from the coffee was nothing compared to the emotional wound he had just inflicted. He had crossed a line I never thought he would. But what hurt the most wasn't the burning sensation on my skin. It wasn't the coldness in his eyes, or the way he tried to justify his actions. It was the realization that this wasn't just a one-time argument. This was who he had become, a man who saw me as nothing more than a tool, a resource for his desires, a means to his financial ends. I wiped my face, my hands trembling as I tried to regain my composure. "You've crossed the line, Mark," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the ringing in my ears. "You've really crossed the line." But he didn't even seem to hear me. He was already walking away, muttering under his breath about how I never understood him, how I was always in the way. I stood there for a long time, my mind racing. The pain of the coffee faded, but the sting of betrayal remained. It wasn't just about the money or even about the coffee. It was about the disrespect, the disregard for everything I had done for this family, for this marriage. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to sit back and take it anymore. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The rest of the day passed in a haze. The kids were up, and I tried my best to act like everything was normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. I couldn't shake the image of Mark's angry face, the way he had humiliated me without a second thought. I kept telling myself it was just an isolated incident, but deep down I knew it wasn't. It was a reflection of something much deeper, something that had been festering for far too long. And so, as I went about my day, a new realization began to take shape. This wasn't about forgiveness anymore. This wasn't about pretending everything was okay. It was about standing up for myself. It was about reclaiming control of my life. Mark had just made a grave mistake. And though the revenge wouldn't come immediately, I knew it was coming. The question was, how far was I willing to go? The coffee stains had dried on my blouse by the time the kids came downstairs, their sleepy eyes blinking at me as they rubbed at their faces. It felt like the longest morning of my life, but somehow I managed to keep it together. I smiled for them, telling them that everything was fine, but inside I was a wreck. I couldn't shake the feeling of the hot liquid searing my skin, or the bitter taste of humiliation that lingered long after Mark had stormed out of the room. I moved through the rest of the morning in a daze, getting the kids dressed, making their lunches, all while the tension in the house felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark was quiet, retreating into his usual silence after a fight. He wasn't apologetic. He never was. His anger had simmered down, but the contempt was still there, just below the surface. And I knew deep down that this wasn't the first time he'd crossed this line. It was just the first time it had felt like a breaking point. By the time the kids were off to school, Mark had already left for work, slamming the door behind him without so much as a glance back. The house felt eerily quiet, almost oppressive, like the calm before the storm. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where my coffee cup had been, the remnants of the morning's chaos still fresh in my mind. I could feel my heartbeat quicken, the adrenaline from the morning slowly fading into anger. How dare he? How dare he treat me like that in front of our children? How dare he throw something so personal, so intimate like that? I had always tried to be the calm one, the mediator, the one who kept things together, but now I was just a shell of the woman I used to be. I stood there for what felt like hours, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I could feel the sting on my skin from where the coffee had splashed, but the emotional pain was far worse. It wasn't the burn that hurt the most. It was the realization that this wasn't just about a credit card or a cup of coffee. It was about something deeper. Something I hadn't been willing to acknowledge until now. It was about the way Mark had always treated me, like I was less than. Like my feelings didn't matter, my needs were irrelevant, and my dignity was something to be tossed aside the moment it was inconvenient for him. This wasn't a one-off argument. This wasn't just him having a bad day. This was him showing me who he truly was, and who he had always been. The betrayal felt like a punch to the gut. I had been married to this man for years, had built a life with him, and yet I realized I didn't truly know him anymore. The man I had fallen in love with, the man I had trusted, seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone who saw me as nothing more than a tool to get what he wanted. He didn't care about me, not really. He didn't care about the years of sacrifice, the late nights spent worrying about bills, the love and commitment I had given him. He cared about what I could provide him with, nothing more. That thought hit me like a ton of bricks, and I felt something shift inside of me. A crack in the foundation of our marriage, something that had always been there but I had been too afraid to face. I had spent years trying to hold everything together, trying to fix what was broken, trying to make it work. But the truth was I had been holding on to a dream, not a reality. I glanced down at my blouse, the one he had ruined with his rage, and a strange sense of clarity washed over me. This was the moment. This was the moment I had to choose who I wanted to be, who I was going to become. I could keep pretending that everything was fine, that I could fix him, that things would get better. Or I could finally admit the truth. Things would never change. Not unless I made them. And just like that, I knew what I had to do. The rest of the day passed in a blur of thoughts, emotions, and questions. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. The way he had thrown the coffee in my face, the anger in his eyes, the way he had made me feel small and insignificant. I knew he would never apologize. He never did. Mark didn't believe in apologies. To him, they were a sign of weakness. So I would never get an apology for the way he had humiliated me. I would never hear him admit that he was wrong. But I didn't need that. I didn't need him to admit anything. What I needed was to take back control. To show him that I wasn't the same woman I had been when we first got married. I wasn't the same woman who had put up with his careless behavior and his emotional manipulation. I was done. Done with the excuses, done with the lies, done with the humiliation. By the time evening rolled around, I had already made up my mind. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew it had to be something big. Something that would make him realize that I wasn't just going to let this slide. Something that would make him understand the consequences of treating me the way he had. Mark came home late that night as usual, not bothering to acknowledge me when he walked through the door. He was too busy texting on his phone, probably already thinking about his next expense, his next careless purchase. But something in me snapped. I wasn't going to let this go on any longer. I couldn't. I stood up, my heart racing as I walked over to him. He didn't even look up when I spoke. "You've crossed the line, Mark," I said, my voice steady but firm. He looked up at me, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, my hands shaking slightly, but I held my ground. "What you did today was unforgivable. And I'm done. I'm done letting you walk all over me." His expression shifted, a mix of annoyance and disbelief. "You're really going to do this? You're going to throw away everything over a stupid argument about money?" "It's not just about the money," I replied, my voice stronger now. "It's about respect. It's about me, my dignity. And I won't stand for it anymore." For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. And the moment had come. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't need to say anything else. I didn't need to explain myself. I had made my decision and it was final. The next chapter of my life was about to begin. And this time I was in control. The days after that morning felt like a blur. Life had become a strange dance between normalcy and something new, something different. On the surface, everything looked the same. I still made breakfast, packed the kids' lunches, and made sure they got to school on time. But underneath it all, a quiet storm was brewing. The woman who had once been the quiet, submissive wife, the one who swallowed her feelings and played along with the charade, was slowly, but surely being replaced by someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who wouldn't take this kind of disrespect anymore. The first few days after the coffee incident, Mark had tried to act as though nothing had happened. He avoided eye contact, kept his distance, and resorted to the usual passive-aggressive tactics. Leaving dirty laundry around the house, making vague comments about how I wasn't being fair, and of course, using silence as a weapon. I could feel the tension in the air, but I didn't bite. I was done being the one to fix things. Done apologizing for things I hadn't done. This time it was on him. I had always been the one to make the decisions in our home, the one who handled the finances, managed the household, and tried to keep us afloat. But for too long I had allowed him to make excuses, to manipulate me into believing that his behavior was somehow my fault. I had allowed him to use my love for him against me, twisting it into something that suited his needs. But now I wasn't going to sit back anymore. Now I had a plan. It wasn't a big grand gesture. Didn't need to be. It was about taking back control piece by piece. It was about reclaiming what I had lost, my sense of self, my power, my dignity. I started small. I opened my own bank account. It wasn't something I had ever considered before. After all, we had always shared everything. But it felt empowering to have something that was just mine. I transferred some money from our joint account into it, just enough to start building a financial cushion of my own. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And that felt like victory. Next, I applied for a credit card in my name. I knew Mark wouldn't like it. He would call me paranoid or accuse me of not trusting him. But I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something for myself, something that would make me feel safe. I wasn't going to put my future in his hands anymore. But I didn't stop there. I started tracking everything. I kept a mental note of every suspicious purchase, every time he asked for money, every time he seemed to be hiding something. It wasn't about revenge at this point. It was about knowledge. I needed to know what I was up against. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat down at the computer and began pulling out our financial records. I went through everything: our bills, our savings, the credit card statements. I noticed patterns, things I had ignored for far too long. Mark had been taking out small loans in my name without my permission. He'd been using credit cards I didn't even know existed. He'd been lying about his income and spending money we didn't have, all while I was left holding the bag. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The lies, the manipulation, it was all right there in front of me. A damning trail of his deceit. But instead of feeling crushed, I felt something else rising inside me. A sense of purpose. I wasn't going to let this go on. I wasn't going to let him destroy everything I had worked for. The next day, I went to the bank and changed the passwords to all our accounts. I didn't make a big scene. I didn't tell him what I was doing. I just took the necessary steps to protect myself and my children. I knew I had to be smart about this. I had to make sure I was one step ahead of him. Mark hadn't noticed at first. For a few days, everything seemed the same. But I could feel the shift in the air. I knew he was starting to wonder why I wasn't reacting the way I used to. Why I wasn't begging him to talk things out, apologizing for my overreaction. But I wasn't going to do that anymore. I wasn't going to let him walk all over me. I wasn't going to allow him to use me as a doormat. One afternoon, while he was out running errands, I went to the drawer where he kept his wallet. I didn't take anything, but I did a quick scan of what I could find. I was looking for clues, something that would give me an edge. And there it was, his credit card statement tucked behind a pile of receipts. I took a photo of it with my phone and slid it back into place. The more I dug, the more I uncovered. It wasn't just the credit card debt. It was the way he had been using me for years. The way he had manipulated me into thinking that his actions were justified, that I was the one who was wrong for questioning him. I had let him control me, let him make me feel small for so long, and now I was done. The final straw came when I found out he had been trying to make a large purchase for something extravagant, something that I knew we couldn't afford. He was planning to max out another card, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he would come crawling back to me for more money. I wasn't going to let it happen. I had planned my next move carefully. I called the credit card company and reported the fraudulent charges under his name. I knew it would send him into a frenzy, but it was necessary. It wasn't about hurting him. It was about protecting myself and showing him that I was no longer the woman he could manipulate. When Mark came home that night, the tension was palpable. He walked in, clearly expecting things to be back to normal, but I wasn't going to play that game anymore. "Why do you do it?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Why do you cancel my card?" "Because you don't get to do this anymore," I said, my voice steady. "You don't get to use me, to lie to me, to treat me like I'm invisible. I'm done, Mark. I'm done letting you control everything." For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. Not the petty anger he usually threw my way, but genuine fear that maybe, just maybe, I had finally woken up. "You'll regret this," he threatened, but his words felt hollow. There was no power behind them anymore. I wasn't afraid of him. "I don't think I will," I replied quietly as I turned and walked away. I had taken the first steps toward freedom. And no matter what happened next, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back. It didn't take long for Mark to realize that things had changed. At first, he tried to maintain the illusion of control, acting like the same old Mark, demanding, manipulative, and self-centered. But the cracks in his facade were becoming more apparent, and it wasn't long before he started to feel the consequences of his actions. The first sign was the phone call from his credit card company. Mark had always been good at avoiding the consequences of his reckless spending, but this time he couldn't escape it. The company had flagged his account for suspicious activity. He came home that evening looking frantic, the bill he'd tried to hide clenched in his hand like a secret he was afraid to let slip. "Why did you do it?" he demanded, his voice sharp with anger. "You think you can just ruin everything for me? Cancel my card? This is my life, my money." I didn't flinch. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had been preparing for this moment. The moment when he would try to turn everything around and make it look like I was the villain in the story. But I wasn't going to fall for it anymore. "I didn't ruin anything," I replied, my voice steady. "You did this to yourself. You've been living outside the boundaries of responsibility for too long. And I'm not going to sit by and watch it destroy us. He took a step toward me, his fists clenched in frustration. You think you're so much better than me, don't you? All this time, you've been playing the perfect little wife, pretending like you're the one holding everything together. But you're just as much a part of this as I am. I stood my ground. I've been holding everything together because I had to. But you've pushed me to the edge, Mark. I'm not afraid to let go anymore. I won't keep living in this toxic cycle. And I won't keep covering for your mistakes. Mark's face twisted with rage. He was used to me caving in, used to me giving in to his demands. But that woman, the one who let him walk all over her, the one who silently endured everything, was gone. You think this is over? You think you can just walk away from me? He spat the words out, each one more venomous than the last. I'll make sure you regret this. You won't be able to survive without me. His words stung, but I didn't let them break me. The truth was he was scared, and I wasn't afraid of his threats anymore. I knew that I was stronger than I had ever been, and the truth was I didn't need him. I watched as he stormed out of the room, muttering under his breath. But the emotional manipulation didn't stop there. No, it wasn't enough for him to throw a tantrum and walk away. He would find other ways to try and regain control. The next few days were a whirlwind of passive-aggressive comments and attempts to guilt-trip me into giving him back access to everything. He would forget to take the trash out or leave his dirty clothes on the floor, waiting for me to pick up after him, hoping I would cave. He would call and text constantly, asking for money, trying to find ways to get back into my good graces. But I didn't give in. Every time he tried, I stood firm. I no longer felt like I was walking on eggshells. I had found my voice and I wasn't going to lose it again. Then the situation took a different turn. Mark began to play dirty. He started to reach out to my family and friends, trying to turn them against me, planting seeds of doubt about what had really happened. He told them I was overreacting, that I was being unreasonable. He painted himself as the victim and me as the villain, as though I was the one who had betrayed him. I heard rumors of what he was saying, but I refused to engage in the drama. I wasn't interested in playing the role of the broken woman who had been taken advantage of. I wasn't going to let him paint me as the crazy one. I wasn't going to let him control my narrative any longer. It wasn't easy, though. Some days I felt the weight of it all. The constant pressure to keep my emotions in check. The overwhelming desire to just scream at him to admit what he had done. But I knew that wasn't going to help me. Revenge wasn't about getting him to apologize. It was about standing my ground, about taking back the power that I had let him strip away from me. Mark started to withdraw, sensing that his usual tactics weren't working. But that didn't mean he was done. No, this was just the beginning of the final act in our twisted game. One evening a few weeks later, I came home to a scene that felt like a slap in the face. Mark had been in the garage going through my things. The drawer where I kept important documents had been rifled through. He had taken some of my personal items, small things that didn't really matter, but it was the violation of my privacy that sent a chill down my spine. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the mess he had left behind. It wasn't the first time he had invaded my space, but it was the first time he had done it with such a clear intent, to intimidate, to make me feel small. I felt my heart race, but I didn't let it show. I walked over to the mess, sorting through the papers, ignoring the trembling in my hands. I found what I was looking for. The last piece of the puzzle. A small piece of evidence that would destroy him. For the last few weeks, I had been gathering information on Mark. I had been keeping track of his lies, his debts, the financial hole he was digging for himself. And now I had everything I needed. He had been using our joint accounts to pay for things that weren't just for the family. Things that were for his personal gain, gambling, frivolous purchases, everything that had pushed us to the edge of financial ruin. And now I was going to make sure he paid for it. I called the bank and filed a complaint about the fraudulent activity, providing the evidence I had collected. I was careful, methodical, and calculated. I knew Mark would try to lie his way out of it, but this time I had the upper hand. The cards had been stacked against him for far too long, and it was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. When Mark came home that night, the look on his face said it all. He could see it in my eyes. I wasn't scared of him anymore. "You've made a big mistake," he said, his voice full of venom. But there was no real anger in his tone, only desperation. "You made your bed, Mark," I replied quietly. "Now you get to lie in it." And with that, I knew the battle had been won. Mark had lost his hold on me, and there was no going back. The following weeks were a strange mixture of liberation and uncertainty. Mark's reaction to everything I had done was a mix of anger, confusion, and finally resignation. He tried everything: manipulation, guilt trips, even threats, but I remained unshaken. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't afraid to stand my ground. Mark became increasingly distant, not just emotionally but physically as well. He no longer shared a bed with me. The silence between us grew louder with each passing day. He was still angry, too angry to leave the house, too stubborn to admit defeat, but he wasn't fighting for me anymore. He was fighting to maintain control over a situation he could no longer dictate. It wasn't just me who noticed the change. Our friends, the few who hadn't been swayed by his stories, began to ask questions. They could sense the tension between us. They could see that something was different. But none of them knew the full truth. And I wasn't about to share it with anyone. This was my fight, and I wasn't going to let anyone else fight it for me. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, the weight of everything I had done began to settle in. The kids were in bed, and the house was quiet, too quiet. I had always been the one to keep the peace, to manage the chaos, but now, for the first time in a long time, I was free. I had taken back control of my life. I had made the decision to no longer tolerate the toxic, manipulative behavior that had become the norm in my marriage. I had put myself first for the first time in years. And yet, there was a part of me that felt hollow, unsure of where to go from here. I had started a new chapter, but the fear of the unknown still lingered in the back of my mind. What would life look like without Mark? How would I manage everything on my own? And most importantly, would I ever truly be able to forgive myself for allowing things to go on for as long as they had? I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I would be okay. I had already made it this far. I had already taken the hardest step, standing up for myself. And now nothing could break me. Mark's departure came sooner than I expected. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It wasn't a grand Hollywood-style exit. No, Mark packed his things quietly, avoiding eye contact as he left. He never even said goodbye. And for the first time, I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I had finally learned that I wasn't responsible for his happiness. I wasn't responsible for fixing him or making him a better person. He had to do that for himself. And I had to live my life for me, without him, without the weight of his expectations, without the constant emotional roller coaster. The day after Mark left, I sat down in front of my computer and drafted the divorce papers. There was no question in my mind anymore. This was the end. I wasn't going to waste any more time wondering what might have been. I wasn't going to keep hoping that things would magically get better. I had given him every chance. He had made his choice, and so had I. Filing for divorce felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. The future, uncertain as it was, suddenly seemed full of possibilities. I wasn't tied down anymore. I wasn't living in the shadow of someone else's selfishness. The kids were sad, of course. They missed their dad. But I promised them that we would be okay. I promised them that we would find a new way to live. A way that didn't revolve around fear and manipulation. A way that was healthier, more peaceful, and filled with love. In the months that followed, I took it one day at a time. There were moments when I felt like I was drowning in responsibility. Moments when I questioned whether I had made the right choice. But those moments were fleeting. Slowly but surely, I started to rebuild my life piece by piece. I went back to school, finishing a degree I had once abandoned. I started working at a job I loved, something that made me feel fulfilled and proud. I made new friends, real friends who didn't judge me, who didn't see me as a tool to be used. I started to trust myself again. And then one day I realized something I hadn't expected. I had forgiven myself. I had let go of the guilt and the shame. I wasn't the woman I had been when Mark and I first met. I was stronger now. I had learned to value myself, to know my worth. The last time I saw Mark was at the final court hearing for our divorce. He looked tired, worn down, as though the life had been drained from him. He had no fight left in him, no desire to argue. He was a shell of the man he had once been, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of pity for him. But I didn't regret a thing. I walked out of the courtroom that day with my head held high, my heart lighter than it had been in years. It wasn't about victory. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about realizing that I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. I was enough on my own. I had survived. And I was thriving. The woman who had once been broken by love, by betrayal, was now a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. The future, though uncertain, was mine to shape. And I was ready to embrace it.